Welcome, dear listener. You've entered Audible Archives, a sanctuary of sound where lost tales awaken, your guide through these ancient echoes and timeless legends. So lean back, breathe deep, and let the story begin. This is Audible Archives, where every word holds a whisper of magic. You're listening to Audible Archives. I'm Raul, your host, guiding you through a true account of cruelty, survival, and endurance. In part 2 of 12 Years a Slave, Solomon Northup is stripped of identity and cast into the world of human bondage. In these chapters, he learns the rules of survival under new masters. He witnesses brutality firsthand. And slowly, the weight of hopelessness begins to settle in. But even in chains, his spirit doesn't break. These are chapters 6 to 10. The silence deepens. The scars begin.
Chapter 6. The very amiable, pious-hearted Mr. Theophilus Freeman, partner or consignee of James H. Birch, and keeper of the slave pen in New Orleans, was out among his animals early in the morning, with an occasional kick of the older men and women, and many a sharp crack of the whip about the ears of the younger slaves. It was not long before they were all astir and wide awake. Mr. Theophilus Freeman bustled about in a very industrious manner, getting his property ready for the sales room, intending, no doubt, to do that day a rousing business. In the first place, we were required to wash thoroughly, and those with beards to shave. We were then furnished with a new suit each, cheap but clean. The men had hat, coat, shirt, pants, and shoes. The women frocks of calico and handkerchiefs to bind about their heads. We were now conducted into a large room in the front part of the building to which the yard was attached, in order to be properly trained before the admission of customers. The men were arranged on one side of the room, the women on the other. The tallest was placed at the head of the row, then the next tallest, and so on in the order of their respective heights. Emily was at the foot of the line of women. Freeman charged us to remember our places, exhorted us to appear smart and lively, sometimes threatening, and again, holding out various inducements. During the day, he exercised us in the art of looking smart and of moving to our places with exact precision. After being fed in the afternoon, we were again paraded and made to dance. Bob, a colored boy who had some time belonged to Freeman, played on the violin. Standing near him, I made bold to inquire if he could play the Virginia reel. He answered he could not, and asked me if I could play. Replying in the affirmative, he handed me the violin. I struck up a tune and finished it. Freeman ordered me to continue playing, and seemed well pleased, telling Bob that I far excelled him, a remark that seemed to grieve my musical companion very much. Next day, many customers called to examine Freeman's new lot. The latter gentleman was very loquacious, dwelling at much length upon our several good points and qualities. He would make us hold up our heads, walk briskly back and forth, while customers would feel of our hands and arms and bodies, turn us about, ask us what we could do, make us open our mouths and show our teeth, precisely as a jockey examines a horse which he is about to barter for or purchase. Sometimes a man or woman was taken back to the small house in the yard, stripped, and inspected more minutely. Scars upon a slave's back were considered evidence of a rebellious or unruly spirit, and hurt his sale. One old gentleman, who said he wanted a coachman, appeared to take a fancy to me. From his conversation with Birch, I learned he was a resident in the city. I very much desired that he would buy me, because I conceived it would not be difficult to make my escape from New Orleans on some northern vessel. Freeman asked him $1,500 for me. The old gentleman insisted it was too much, as times were very hard. Freeman, however, declared that I was sound and healthy, of a good constitution, and intelligent. He made it a point to enlarge upon my musical attainments. The old gentleman argued quite adroitly that there was nothing extraordinary about the nigger, and finally, to my regret, went out, saying he would call again. During the day, however, a number of sales were made. David and Caroline were purchased together by a Natchez planter. They left us grinning broadly and in the most happy state of mind, caused by the fact of their not being separated. Lethe was sold to a planter of Baton Rouge, her eyes flashing with anger as she was led away. The same man also purchased Randall. The little fellow was made to jump and run across the floor and perform many other feats, exhibiting his activity and condition. All the time the trade was going on, Eliza was crying aloud and wringing her hands. She besought the man not to buy him, unless he also bought herself and Emily. She promised, in that case, to be the most faithful slave that ever lived. The man answered that he could not afford it, and then Eliza burst into a paroxysm of grief, weeping plaintively. Freeman turned round to her savagely, with his whip in his uplifted hand, ordering her to stop her noise, or he would flog her. He would not have such work, such sniveling, and unless she ceased that minute, he would take her to the yard and give her 100 lashes. Yes, he would take the nonsense out of her pretty quick if he didn't. Might he be D.D.? Eliza shrunk before him and tried to wipe away her tears, but it was all in vain. She wanted to be with her children, she said. The little time she had to live, all the frowns and threats of Freeman, could not wholly silence the afflicted mother. She kept on begging and beseeching them, most piteously, not to separate the three. Over and over again she told them how she loved her boy. A great many times she repeated her former promises, how very faithful and obedient she would be, how hard she would labor day and night, to the last moment of her life, if he would only buy them all together. But it was of no avail. The man could not afford it. The bargain was agreed upon, and Randall must go alone. Then Eliza ran to him, embraced him passionately, kissed him again and again, told him to remember her all the while, her tears falling in the boy's face like rain. Freeman damned her, calling her a blubbering, bawling wench, and ordered her to go to her place and behave herself and be somebody. He swore he wouldn't stand such stuff but a little longer. He would soon give her something to cry about if she was not mighty careful, and that she might depend upon. The planter from Baton Rouge, with his new purchases, was ready to depart. "Don't cry, Mama. I will be a good boy." "Don't cry," said Randall, looking back, as they passed out of the door. "What has become of the lad? God knows." It was a mournful scene, indeed. I would have cried myself if I had dared. That night, nearly all who came in on the brig Orleans were taken ill. They complained of violent pain in the head and back. Little Emily, a thing unusual with her, cried constantly. In the morning, a physician was called in, but was unable to determine the nature of our complaint. While examining me and asking questions touching my symptoms, I gave it as my opinion that it was an attack of smallpox, mentioning the fact of Robert's death as a reason of my belief. It might be so indeed, he thought, and he would send for the head physician of the hospital. Shortly, the head physician came, a small, light-haired man, whom they called Dr. Carr. He pronounced it smallpox, whereupon there was much alarm throughout the yard. Soon after Dr. Carr left, Eliza, Emmy, Harry, and myself were put into a hack and driven to the hospital, a large white marble building, standing on the outskirts of the city. Harry and I were placed in a room in one of the upper stories. I became very sick. For 3 days I was entirely blind. While lying in this state one day, Bob came in, saying to Dr. Carr that Freeman had sent him over to inquire how we were getting on. "Tell him," said the doctor, "that Platt is very bad, but that if he survives until 9 o'clock, he may recover. I expected to die, though there was little in the prospect before me worth living, for the near approach of death appalled me. I thought I could have been resigned to yield up my life in the bosom of my family, but to expire in the midst of strangers, under such circumstances, was a bitter reflection. There were a great number in the hospital, of both sexes and of all ages. In the rear of the building, coffins were manufactured. When one died, the bell told the signal to the undertaker to come and bear away the body to the potter's field. Many times each day and night, the tolling bell sent forth its melancholy voice, announcing another death. But my time had not yet come. The crisis having passed, I began to revive, and at the end of 2 weeks and 2 days, returned with Harry to the pen, bearing upon my face the effects of the malady, which to this day continues to disfigure it. Eliza and Emily were also brought back next day in a hack, and again were we paraded in the sales room for the inspection and examination of purchasers. I still indulged the hope that the old gentleman in search of a coachman would call again, as he had promised, and purchase me. In that event, I felt an abiding confidence that I would soon regain my liberty. Customer after customer entered, but the old gentleman never made his appearance. At length, one day, while we were in the yard, Freeman came out and ordered us to our places in the great room. A gentleman was waiting for us as we entered, and inasmuch as he will be often mentioned in the progress of this narrative, a description of his personal appearance and my estimation of his character, at first sight, may not be out of place. He was a man above the ordinary height, somewhat bent and stooping forward. He was a good-looking man, and appeared to have reached about the middle age of life. There was nothing repulsive in his presence, but on the other hand, there was something cheerful and attractive in his face and in his tone of voice. The finer elements were all kindly mingled in his breast, as anyone could see. He moved about among us, asking many questions as to what we could do and what labor we had been accustomed to, if we thought we would like to live with him, and would be good boys if he would buy us, and other interrogatories of like character. After some further inspection and conversation touching prices, he finally offered Freeman $1,000 for me, $900 for Harry, and $700 for Eliza. Whether the smallpox had depreciated our value, or from what cause Freeman had concluded to fall $500 from the price I was before held at, I cannot say. At any rate, after a little shrewd reflection, he announced his acceptance of the offer. As soon as Eliza heard it, she was in an agony again. By this time, she had become haggard and hollow-eyed with sickness and with sorrow. It would be a relief if I could consistently pass over in silence the scene that now ensued. It recalls memories more mournful and affecting than any language can portray. I have seen mothers kissing for the last time the faces of their dead offspring. I have seen them looking down into the grave as the earth fell with a dull sound upon their coffins, hiding them from their eyes forever. But never have I seen such an exhibition of intense, unmeasured, and unbounded grief as when Eliza was parted from her child. She broke from her place in the line of women, and rushing down where Emily was standing, caught her in her arms. The child, sensible of some impending danger, instinctively fastened her hands around her mother's neck and nestled her little head upon her bosom. Freeman sternly ordered her to be quiet, but she did not heed him. He caught her by the arm and pulled her rudely, but she only clung the closer to the child. Then, with a volley of great oaths, he struck her such a heartless blow that she staggered backward and was like to fall. Oh, how piteously then did she beseech and beg and pray that they might not be separated. Why could they not be purchased together? Why not let her have one of her dear children? "Mercy, mercy, master," she cried, falling on her knees. "Please, master," by Emily. "I can never work any if she is taken from me. I will die." Freeman interfered again, but disregarding him, she still pleaded most earnestly, telling how Randall had been taken from her, how she never would see him again. And now it was too bad, oh God. It was too bad, too cruel, to take her away from Emily, her pride, her only darling, that could not live. It was so young, without its mother. Finally, after much more supplication, the purchaser of Eliza stepped forward, evidently affected, and said to Freeman he would buy Emily, and asked him what her price was. "What is her price?" "Buy her," was the responsive interrogatory of Theophilus Freeman. and instantly answering his own inquiry, he added, "I won't sell her. She's not for sale." The man remarked he was not in need of one so young that it would be of no profit to him. But since the mother was so fond of her, rather than see them separated, he would pay a reasonable price. But to this humane proposal Freeman was entirely deaf. He would not sell her then on any account whatever. There were heaps and piles of money to be made of her, he said, when she was a few years older. There were men enough in New Orleans who would give $5,000 for such an extra handsome, fancy piece as Emily would be, rather than not get her. No, he would not sell her then. She was a beauty, a picture, a doll, one of the regular bloods, none of your thick-lipped, bullet-headed, cotton-picking niggers, if she was might heebie-deedy. When Eliza heard Freeman's determination not to part with Emily, she became absolutely frantic. "I will not go without her. They shall not take her from me," she fairly shrieked, her shrieks commingling with the loud and angry voice of Freeman, commanding her to be silent. Meantime, Harry and myself had been to the yard and returned with our blankets, and were at the front door, ready to leave. Our purchaser stood near us, gazing at Eliza with an expression indicative of regret at having bought her at the expense of so much sorrow. We waited some time, when finally Freeman, out of patience, tore Emily from her mother by main force, the two clinging to each other with all their might. "Don't leave me, Mama, don't leave me," screamed the child as its mother was pushed harshly forward. "Don't let me come back, Mama," she still cried, stretching forth her little arms imploringly. But she cried in vain. Out of the door and into the street we were quickly hurried. Still he could hear her calling to her mother, "Come back, don't leave me, come back, Mama," until her infant voice grew faint and still more faint and gradually died away as distance intervened, and finally was wholly lost. Eliza never after saw or heard of Emily or Randall. Day nor night, however, were they ever absent from her memory. In the cotton field, in the cabin, always and everywhere, she was talking of them often to them, as if they were actually present. Only when absorbed in that illusion or asleep did she ever have a moment's comfort afterwards. She was no common slave, as has been said. To a large share of natural intelligence which she possessed was added a general knowledge and information on most subjects. She had enjoyed opportunities such as are afforded to very few of her oppressed class. She had been lifted up into the regions of a higher life. Freedom for herself and for her offspring, for many years had been her cloud by day, her pillar of fire by night. In her pilgrimage through the wilderness of bondage, with eyes fixed upon that hope-inspiring beacon, she had at length ascended to the top of Pisgah and beheld the land of promise. In an unexpected moment, she was utterly overwhelmed with disappointment and despair. The glorious vision of liberty faded from her sight as they led her away into captivity. Now she weepeth sore in the night, and tears are on her cheeks. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. In Chapter 6, Solomon Northup is sold, not as a man, not as a skilled violinist, not even as a father, a husband, or a citizen, but as Platt, a name forced upon him, a shadow in human form, transported like cargo through the South. He is purchased by William Ford, a Baptist preacher, a plantation owner, a man described as kind for a slaveholder. But even kindness in slavery is a poisoned offering, for it is not cruel like Birch. He does not strike or sneer or shout. He speaks in calm tones. He listens. But let us not mistake civility for morality, for it may be gentle, but he still buys men. He still profits from their labor, and he still walks through his fields, while other men bleed beneath the sun. This chapter explores one of the most dangerous illusions of American slavery, the myth of the benevolent owner. Ford is educated, religious. He appreciates Solomon's intelligence and skills, but he does not free him. He does not question the system that enables his wealth, and this reveals the truth beneath the myth. Even the kindest slaveholder still claims ownership over another human soul. Even gentle chains are still chains. Ford is a man of God, a preacher, and yet he buys human beings, justifying it with scripture and societal norms. This was not rare. Many Southern planters were devout Christians who preached salvation on Sundays and profited from bondage on Mondays. The Bible was used not only to uplift, but to enslave, twisted to serve the interests of power and property. In Solomon's case, Ford's religion offers no sanctuary, only a quieter form of captivity. There is a moment in this chapter, subtle but chilling. Solomon sees the landscape of the South for the first time. The dense swamps, the rising heat, the sense of endless, unbroken fields. He is not simply changing masters. He is descending into another world. A world that will not remember Saratoga. A world that will not let him speak his true name. This is no longer a wrongful imprisonment. This is plantation life. And there is no road home from here. Solomon remains outwardly calm. He adapts, he observes, but within him, the ember of identity still glows. Ford may treat him well, but Solomon does not forget. He is not Platt. He is not a tool. He is Solomon Northup. And though the world around him insists otherwise, he continues silently to bear witness. In chapter 6, Solomon enters a new house, but he is still a prisoner. He is given food, shelter, and duties, but not freedom. The kindness of William Ford is a mask worn by the greater monster of slavery, and soon even that kindness will not last. Chapter 7. On leaving the New Orleans slave pen, Harry and I followed our new master through the streets, while Eliza, crying and turning back, was forced along by Freeman and his minions, until we found ourselves on board the steamboat Rodolph, then lying at the levee. In the course of half an hour, we were moving briskly up the Mississippi, bound for some point on Red River. There were quite a number of slaves on board beside ourselves, just purchased in the New Orleans market. I remember a Mr. Kelso, who was said to be a well-known and extensive planter, had in charge a gang of women. Our master's name was William Ford. He resided then in the Great Pine Woods in the parish of Avoyelles, situated on the right bank of Red River, in the heart of Louisiana. He is now a Baptist preacher throughout the whole parish of Avoyelles, and especially along both shores of Bayou Boeuf, where he is more intimately known. He is accounted by his fellow citizens as a worthy minister of God. In many northern minds, perhaps, the idea of a man holding his brother man in servitude and the traffic in human flesh may seem altogether incompatible with their conceptions of a moral or religious life. From descriptions of such men as Birch and Freeman and others hereinafter mentioned, they are led to despise and execrate the whole class of slaveholders indiscriminately. But I was sometime a slave and had an opportunity of learning well his character and disposition. And it is but simple justice to him when I say, in my opinion, there never was a more kind, noble, candid Christian man than William Ford. The influences and associations that had always surrounded him blinded him to the inherent wrong at the bottom of the system of slavery. He never doubted the moral right of one man holding another in subjection. Looking through the same medium with his fathers before him, he saw things in the same light. Brought up under other circumstances and other influences, his notions would undoubtedly have been different. Nevertheless, he was a model master, walking uprightly, according to the light of his understanding, and fortunate was the slave who came to his possession. Were all men such as he, slavery would be deprived of more than half its bitterness. We were 2 days and 3 nights on board the steamboat Rodolph, during which time nothing of particular interest occurred. I was now known as Platt, the name given me by Birch, and by which I was designated through the whole period of my servitude. Eliza was sold by the name of Drady. She was so distinguished in the conveyance to Ford, now on record in the recorder's office in New Orleans. On our passage, I was constantly reflecting on my situation and consulting with myself on the best course to pursue in order to effect my ultimate escape. Sometime, not only then, but afterwards, I was almost on the point of disclosing fully to Ford the facts of my history. I am inclined now to the opinion it would have resulted in my benefit. This course was often considered, but through fear of its miscarriage, never put into execution, until eventually my transfer and his pecuniary embarrassments rendered it evidently unsafe. Afterwards, under other masters unlike William Ford, I knew well enough the slightest knowledge of my real character would consign me at once to the remoter depths of slavery. I was too costly a chattel to be lost, and was well aware that I would be taken farther on, into some by place over the Texan border perhaps, and sold. That I would be disposed of as the thief disposes of his stolen horse, if my right to freedom was even whispered. So I resolved to lock the secret closely in my heart, never to utter one word or syllable as to who or what I was trusting in Providence and my own shrewdness for deliverance. At length we left the steamboat Rodolphe at a place called Alexandria, several hundred miles from New Orleans. It is a small town on the southern shore of Red River. Having remained there overnight, we entered the morning train of cars, and were soon at Bayou Lamourie, a still smaller place, distant 18 miles from Alexandria. At that time, it was the termination of the railroad. Ford's plantation was situated on the Texas Road, 12 miles from Lamourie, in the Great Pine Woods. This distance, it was announced to us, must be traveled on foot, there being public conveyances no farther. Accordingly, we all set out in the company of Ford. It was an excessively hot day. Harry, Eliza, and myself were yet weak, and the bottoms of our feet were very tender from the effects of the smallpox. We proceeded slowly, Ford telling us to take our time and sit down and rest whenever we desired, a privilege that was taken advantage of quite frequently. After leaving Lamourie and crossing two plantations, one belonging to Mr. Carnell, the other to Mr. Flint, we reached the Pine Woods, a wilderness that stretches to the Sabine River. The whole country about Red River is low and marshy. The Pine Woods, as they are called, is comparatively upland, with frequent small intervals, however, running through them. This upland is covered with numerous trees, the white oak, the chinkapin, resembling chestnut, but principally the yellow pine. They are of great size, running up 60 feet and perfectly straight. The woods were full of cattle, very shy and wild, dashing away in herds, with a loud snuff at our approach. Some of them were marked or branded. The rest appeared to be in their wild and untamed state. They are much smaller than northern breeds, and the peculiarity about them that most attracted my attention was their horns. They stand out from the sides of the head precisely straight, like two iron spikes. At noon we reached a cleared piece of ground containing 3 or 4 acres. Upon it was a small, unpainted wooden house, a corn crib, or, as we would say, a barn and a log kitchen, standing about a rod from the house. It was the summer residence of Mr. Martin. Rich planters, having large establishments on Bayou Boeuf, are accustomed to spend the warmer season in these woods. Here they find clear water and delightful shades. In fact, these retreats are to the planters of that section of the country what Newport and Saratoga are to the wealthier inhabitants of northern cities. We were sent around into the kitchen and supplied with sweet potatoes, cornbread, and bacon, while Master Ford dined with Martin in the house. There were several slaves about the premises. Martin came out and took a look at us, asking for the price of each, if we were green hands, and so forth, and making inquiries in relation to the slave market generally. After a long rest, we set forth again, following the Texas Road, which had the appearance of being very rarely traveled. For 5 miles we passed through continuous woods without observing a single habitation. At length, just as the sun was sinking in the west, we entered another opening, containing some 12 or 15 acres. In this opening stood a house much larger than Mr. Martin's. It was 2 stories high, with a piazza in front. In the rear of it was also a log kitchen, poultry house, corn cribs, and several Negro cabins. Near the house was a peach orchard and gardens of orange and pomegranate trees. The space was entirely surrounded by woods, and covered with a carpet of rich, rank verdure. It was a quiet, lonely, pleasant place, literally a green spot in the wilderness. It was the residence of my master, William Ford. As we approached, a yellow girl, her name was Rose, was standing on the piazza. Going to the door, she called her mistress, who presently came running out to meet her lord. She kissed him and laughingly demanded if he had bought those niggers. Ford said he had, and told us to go round to Sally's cabin and rest ourselves. Turning the corner of the house, we discovered Sally washing her two baby children near her, rolling on the grass. They jumped up and toddled towards us, looked at us a moment like a brace of rabbits, then ran back to their mother as if afraid of us. Sally conducted us into the cabin, told us to lay down our bundles and be seated, for she was sure that we were tired. Just then John, the cook, a boy some 16 years of age and blacker than any crow, came running in, looked steadily in our faces, then turning round, without saying as much as "how d'ye do," ran back to the kitchen, laughing loudly, as if our coming was a great joke indeed. Much wearied with our walk, as soon as it was dark, Harry and I wrapped our blankets round us and laid down upon the cabin floor. My thoughts, as usual, wandered back to my wife and children. The consciousness of my real situation, the hopelessness of any effort to escape through the wide forest of avoyals, pressed heavily upon me. Yet my heart was at home in Saratoga. I was awakened early in the morning by the voice of Master Ford, calling Rose. She hastened into the house to dress the children, Sally to the field to milk the cows, while John was busy in the kitchen preparing breakfast. In the meantime, Harry and I were strolling about the yard, looking at our new quarters. Just after breakfast, a colored man, driving 3 yoke of oxen, attached to a wagon load of lumber, drove into the opening. He was a slave of Ford's named Walton, the husband of Rose. By the way, Rose was a native of Washington and had been brought from thence 5 years before. She had never seen Eliza, but she had heard of Barry, and they knew the same streets and the same people, either personally or by reputation. They became fast friends immediately and talked a great deal together of old times and of friends they had left behind. Ford was, at that time, a wealthy man. Besides his seat in the Pine Woods, he owned a large lumbering establishment on Indian Creek 4 miles distant, and also, in his wife's right, an extensive plantation and many slaves on Bayou Burf. Walton had come with his load of lumber from the mills on Indian Creek. Ford directed us to return with him, saying he would follow us as soon as possible. Before leaving, Mistress Ford called me into the storeroom and handed me, as it is there termed, a tin bucket of molasses for Harry and myself. Eliza was still wringing her hands and deploring the loss of her children. Ford tried as much as possible to console her, told her she need not work very hard, that she might remain with Rose and assist the madam in the house affairs, riding with Walton in the wagon. Harry and I became quite well acquainted with him long before reaching Indian Creek. He was a born thrall of Ford's and spoke kindly and affectionately of him, as a child would speak of his own father. In answer to his inquiries from whence I came, I told him from Washington. Of that city, he had heard much from his wife, Rose, and all the way plied me with many extravagant and absurd questions. On reaching the mills at Indian Creek, we found 2 more of Ford's slaves, Sam and Anthony. Sam also was a Washingtonian, having been brought out in the same gang with Rose. He had worked on a farm near Georgetown. Anthony was a blacksmith from Kentucky who had been in his present master's service about 10 years. Sam knew Birch, and when informed that he was the trader who had sent me on from Washington, it was remarkable how well we agreed upon the subject of his superlative rascality. He had forwarded Sam. Also, on Ford's arrival at the mill, we were employed in piling lumber and chopping logs, which occupation we continued during the remainder of the summer. We usually spent our Sabbaths at the opening, on which days our master would gather all his slaves about him and read and expound scriptures. He sought to inculcate in our minds feelings of kindness towards each other, of dependence upon God, setting forth the rewards promised unto those who lead an upright and prayerful life. Seated in the doorway of his house, surrounded by his manservants and his maidservants, who looked earnestly into the good man's face, he spoke of the loving kindness of the Creator and of the life that is to come. Often did the voice of prayer ascend from his lips to heaven, the only sound that broke the solitude of the place. In the course of the summer, Sam became deeply convicted, his mind dwelling intensely on the subject of religion. His mistress gave him a Bible, which he carried with him to his work. Whatever leisure time was allowed him, he spent in perusing it, though it was only with great difficulty that he could master any part of it. I often read to him, a favor which he well repaid me by many expressions of gratitude. Sam's piety was frequently observed by white men who came to the mill, and the remark it most generally provoked was that a man like Ford, who allowed his slaves to have Bibles, was not fit to own a nigger. He, however, lost nothing by his kindness. It is a fact I have more than once observed, that those who treated their slaves most leniently were rewarded by the greatest amount of labor. I know it from my own experience. It was a source of pleasure to surprise Master Ford with a greater day's work than was required, while under subsequent masters there was no prompter to extra effort but the overseer's lash. It was the desire of Ford's approving voice that suggested to me an idea that resulted to his profit. The lumber we were manufacturing was contracted to be delivered at Lamourie. It had hitherto been transported by land and was an important item of expense. Indian Creek, upon which the mills were situated, was a narrow but deep stream emptying into Bayou Boeuf. In some places it was not more than 12 feet wide and much obstructed with trunks of trees. Bayou Boeuf was connected with Bayou Lamourie. I ascertained the distance from the mills to the point on the latter bayou, where our lumber was to be delivered, was but a few miles less by land than by water, provided the creek could be made navigable for rafts. It occurred to me that the expense of transportation would be materially diminished. Adam Tatum, a little white man who had been a soldier in Florida and had strolled into that distant region, was foreman and superintendent of the mills. He scouted the idea, but Ford, when I laid it before him, received it favorably and permitted me to try the experiment. Having removed the obstructions, I made up a narrow raft consisting of 12 cribs. At this business, I think I was quite skillful, not having forgotten my experience years before on the Champlain Canal. I labored hard, being extremely anxious to succeed, both from a desire to please my master and to show Adam Tatum that my scheme was not such a visionary one as he incessantly pronounced it. One hand could manage 3 cribs. I took charge of the forward 3 and commenced poling down the creek. In due time we entered the first bayou and finally reached our destination in a shorter period of time than I had anticipated. The arrival of the raft at Lamourie created a sensation, while Mr. Ford loaded me with commendations. On all sides I heard Ford's Platte pronounced the smartest nigger in the pine woods. In fact, I was the Fulton of Indian Creek. I was not insensible to the praise bestowed upon me, and enjoyed especially my triumph over Tatum, whose half-malicious ridicule had stung my pride. From this time, the entire control of bringing the lumber to Lamourie was placed in my hands until the contract was fulfilled. Indian Creek, in its whole length, flows through a magnificent forest. There dwells on its shore a tribe of Indians, a remnant of the Chickasaws or Chickapees, if I remember rightly. They live in simple huts 10 or 12 feet square, constructed of pine poles and covered with bark. They subsist principally on the flesh of the deer, the coon, and opossum, all of which are plenty in these woods. Sometimes they exchange venison for a little corn and whiskey with the planters on the bayous. Their usual dress is buckskin breeches and calico hunting shirts of fantastic colors, buttoned from belt to chin. They wear brass rings on their wrists and in their ears and noses. The dress of the squaws is very similar. They are fond of dogs and horses, owning many of the latter, of a small, tough breed, and are skillful riders. Their bridles, girths, and saddles were made of raw skins of animals. Their stirrups of a certain kind of wood. Mounted astride their ponies, men and women, I have seen them dash out into the woods at the utmost of their speed, following narrow winding paths and dodging trees in a manner that eclipsed the most miraculous feats of civilized equestrianism. Circling away in various directions, the forest echoing and re-echoing with their whoops, they would presently return at the same dashing, headlong speed with which they started. Their village was on Indian Creek, known as Indian Castle, but their range extended to the Sabine River. Occasionally, a tribe from Texas would come over on a visit, and then there was indeed a carnival in the Great Pine Woods. Chief of the tribe was Cascala. Second in rank, John Botez, his son-in-law, with both of whom, as with many others of the tribe, I became acquainted during my frequent voyages down the creek with rafts. Sam and myself would often visit them when the day's task was done. They were obedient to the chief. The word of Cascala was their law. They were rude but harmless people, and enjoyed their wild mode of life. They had little fancy for the open country, the cleared lands on the shores of the bayous, but preferred to hide themselves within the shadows of the forest. They worshipped the Great Spirit, loved whiskey, and were happy. On one occasion, I was present at a dance when a roving herd from Texas had encamped in their village. The entire carcass of a deer was roasting before a large fire, which threw its light a long distance among the trees under which they were assembled. When they had formed in a ring, men and squaws alternately, a sort of Indian fiddle set up an indescribable tune. It was a continuous, melancholy kind of wavy sound, with the slightest possible variation. At the first note, if indeed there was more than one note in the whole tune, they circled around, trotting after each other, and giving utterance to a guttural sing-song noise, equally as nondescript as the music of the fiddle. At the end of the third circuit, they would stop suddenly, whoop, as if their lungs would crack, then break from a ring, forming in couples, man and squaw, each jumping backwards as far as possible from the other, then forwards, which graceful feat having been twice or thrice accomplished. They would form in a ring and go trotting round again. The best dancer appeared to be considered the one who could whoop the loudest, jump the farthest, and utter the most excruciating noise. At intervals, one or more would leave the dancing circle, and going to the fire, cut from the roasting carcass a slice of venison. In a hole shaped like a mortar, cut in the trunk of a fallen tree, they pounded corn with a wooden pestle, and of the meal made cake. Alternately, they danced and ate. Thus were the visitors from Texas entertained by the dusky sons and daughters of the Chickapees, and such is a description, as I saw it, of an Indian ball in the pine woods of Avoyelles. In the autumn I left the mills and was employed at the opening. One day the mistress was urging Ford to procure a loom, in order that Sally might commence weaving cloth for the winter garments of the slaves. He could not imagine where one was to be found when I suggested that the easiest way to get one would be to make it, informing him at the same time that I was a sort of jack at all trades and would attempt it with his permission. It was granted very readily, and I was allowed to go to a neighboring planter's to inspect one before commencing the undertaking. At length it was finished and pronounced by Sally to be perfect. She could easily weave her task of 14 yards, milk the cows, and have leisure time besides each day. It worked so well I was continued in the employment of making looms, which were taken down to the plantation on the bayou. At this time one John M. Tibiats, a carpenter, came to the opening to do some work on master's house. I was directed to quit the looms and assist him. For 2 weeks I was in his company, planning and matching boards for ceiling, a plastered room being a rare thing in the parish of Avoyelles. John M. Tibiats was the opposite of Ford in all respects. He was a small, crabbed, quick-tempered, spiteful man. He had no fixed residence that I ever heard of, but passed from one plantation to another, wherever he could find employment. He was without standing in the community, not esteemed by white men, nor even respected by slaves. He was ignorant withal, and of a revengeful disposition. He left the parish long before I did, and I know not whether he is at present alive or dead. Certain it is, it was a most unlucky day for me that brought us together. During my residence with Master, Ford I had seen only the bright side of slavery. His was no heavy hand crushing us to the earth. He pointed upwards, and with benign and cheering words addressed us as his fellow mortals, accountable, like himself, to the Maker of us all. I think of him with affection, and had my family been with me, could have borne his gentle servitude, without murmuring, all my days. But clouds were gathering in the horizon, forerunners of a pitiless storm that was soon to break over me. I was doomed to endure such bitter trials as the poor slave only knows, and to lead no more the comparatively happy life which I had led in the great pine woods. In Chapter 7, the illusion of stability begins to crack. Solomon Northup, now Platt in name, but not in soul, has become a valued worker on William Ford's plantation. His intellect is respected, his talents recognized. He builds rafts, he engineers solutions, he earns Ford's trust. And yet, even in this fragile space of relative peace, violence waits in the wings. Because no matter how skilled a man may be, no matter how useful, in the world of slavery, usefulness is not protection. Only property can be protected. Solomon is praised, even admired. He makes himself indispensable. But like a violin strung too tightly, tension hums beneath every gesture. He walks the line between survival and suspicion. He must be smart, but not too smart, obedient, but not passive, indispensable, but never proud. One wrong step, and admiration can curdle into resentment. This chapter also introduces John M. Tibiats, a carpenter with a bitter tongue and a jealous heart. Where Ford sees Solomon's talent as an asset, Tibiats sees it as a threat. It is a warning, subtle but sharp, that not all men tolerate greatness in those they believe beneath them. Tibiats represents a type common to the system, petty, cruel, empowered by proximity to power. He cannot truly harm Ford, so he will seek to harm Ford's property. And that means Solomon. In a free world, Solomon's mind would be a gift. In this one, it's a risk. Ford's approval does not rewrite the laws of the South. A slave who thinks is a slave who threatens. Solomon must weigh every word, every act of improvement against the unpredictable emotions of white men who have the power of life and death over him. It is not enough to survive. He must navigate personalities like a soldier crossing a minefield. Ford is painted as a decent man, but even he is a reluctant master, bound by debt, societal pressure, and a system he never questions deeply enough to reject. His moral softness cannot shield Solomon forever. When financial troubles rise, Solomon is sold again, not for punishment, but as payment. And just like that, the small flicker of kindness is snuffed out by the cold math of ownership. This chapter is not violent, but it is ominous, because now Solomon knows what kind of world he is in, a world where your value is only as durable as your owner's fortune, and a world where even a man of God will sell you when the books demand balance. Chapter 7 teaches a bitter lesson. You can serve well, you can build, solve, achieve, but you are still a line in someone's ledger. And when that line shifts, so does your fate. Solomon is learning the truth of bondage. There are no foundations, no promises, only transactions, and the next master will not be kind. Chapter 8. William Ford unfortunately became embarrassed in his pecuniary affairs. A heavy judgment was rendered against him in consequence of his having become security for his brother Franklin Ford, residing on Red River above Alexandria, and who had failed to meet his liabilities. He was also indebted to John M. Tibiats to a considerable amount in consideration of his services in building the mills on Indian Creek, and also a weaving house, corn mill, and other erections on the plantation at Bayou Boeuf, not yet completed. It was therefore necessary, in order to meet these demands, to dispose of 18 slaves, myself among the number. 17 of them, including Sam and Harry, were purchased by Peter Compton, a planter also residing on Red River. I was sold to Tibiats in consequence, undoubtedly, of my slight skill as a carpenter. This was in the winter of 1842. The deed of myself from Freeman to Ford, as I ascertained from the public records in New Orleans on my return, was dated June 23d, 1841. At the time of my sale to Tibiats, the price agreed to be given for me being more than the debt, for it took a chattel mortgage of $400. I am indebted for my life, as will hereafter be seen, to that mortgage. I bade farewell to my good friends at the opening, and departed with my new master Tibiats. We went down to the plantation on Bayou Boeuf, distant 27 miles from the Pine Woods, to complete the unfinished contract. Bayou Boeuf is a sluggish, winding stream, one of those stagnant bodies of water common in that region, setting back from Red River. It stretches from a point not far from Alexandria, in a southeasterly direction, and following its tortuous course, is more than 50 miles in length. Large cotton and sugar plantations line each shore, extending back to the borders of interminable swamps. It is alive with alligators, rendering it unsafe for swine, or unthinking slave children to stroll along its banks. Upon a bend in this bayou, a short distance from Cheneyville, was situated the plantation of Madame Ford, her brother, Peter Tanner, a great landholder, living on the opposite side. On my arrival at Bayou Boeuf, I had the pleasure of meeting Eliza, whom I had not seen for several months. She had not pleased Mrs. Ford, being more occupied in brooding over her sorrows than in attending to her business, and had, in consequence, been sent down to work in the field on the plantation. She had grown feeble and emaciated, and was still mourning for her children. She asked me if I had forgotten them, and a great many times inquired if I still remembered how handsome little Emily was, how much Randall loved her, and wondered if they were living still, and where the darlings could then be. She had sunk beneath the weight of an excessive grief. Her drooping form and hollow cheeks too plainly indicated that she had well nigh reached the end of her weary road. Ford's overseer on this plantation, and who had the exclusive charge of it, was a Mr. Chapin, a kindly disposed man, and a native of Pennsylvania. In common with others, he held Tibiats in light estimation, which fact, in connection with the $400 mortgage, was fortunate for me. I was now compelled to labor very hard. From earliest dawn until late at night, I was not allowed to be a moment idle, notwithstanding which, Tibiats was never satisfied. He was continually cursing and complaining. He never spoke to me a kind word. I was his faithful slave and earned him large wages every day. And yet I went to my cabin nightly, loaded with abuse and stinging epithets. We had completed the corn mill, the kitchen, and so forth, and were at work upon the weaving house, when I was guilty of an act, in that state punishable with death. It was my first fight with Tibiats. The weaving house we were erecting stood in the orchard a few rods from the residence of Chapin, or the Great House, as it was called. One night, having worked until it was too dark to see, I was ordered by Tibiats to rise very early in the morning, procure a keg of nails from Chapin, and commence putting on the clapboards. I retired to the cabin extremely tired, and having cooked a supper of bacon and corn cake, and conversed a while with Eliza, who occupied the same cabin, as also did Lawson and his wife Mary, and a slave named Bristol, lay down upon the ground floor, little dreaming of the sufferings that awaited me on the morrow. Before daylight, I was on the piazza of the great house, awaiting the appearance of Overseer Chapin. To have aroused him from his slumbers and stated my errand would have been an unpardonable boldness. At length he came out, taking off my hat. I informed him Master Tibiats had directed me to call upon him for a keg of nails. Going into the storeroom, he rolled it out, at the same time saying if Tibiats preferred a different size, he would endeavor to furnish them, but that I might use those until further directed. Then, mounting his horse, which stood saddled and bridled at the door, he rode away into the field, whither the slaves had preceded him, while I took the keg on my shoulder, and proceeding to the weaving house, broke in the head, and commenced nailing on the clapboards. As the day began to open, Tibiats came out of the house to where I was hard at work. He seemed to be that morning even more morose and disagreeable than usual. He was my master, entitled by law to my flesh and blood, and to exercise over me such tyrannical control as his mean nature prompted. But there was no law that could prevent my looking upon him with intense contempt. I despised both his disposition and his intellect. I had just come round to the keg for a further supply of nails as he reached the weaving house. "I thought I told you to commence putting on weatherboards this morning," he remarked. "Yes, master, and I am about it," I replied. "Where?" he demanded. "On the other side," was my answer. He walked round to the other side, examined my work for a while, muttering to himself in a fault-finding tone. "Didn't I tell you last night to get a keg of nails of Chapin?" he broke forth again. "Yes, master, and so I did. An overseer said he would get another size for you if you wanted them." When he came back from the field, Tibiats walked to the keg, looked a moment at the contents, then kicked it violently. Coming towards me in a great passion, he exclaimed, "GDDNU, I thought you knowed something." I made answer, "I tried to do as you told me, master. I didn't mean anything wrong," overseer said. But he interrupted me with such a flood of curses that I was unable to finish the sentence. At length he ran towards the house, and going to the piazza, took down one of the overseer's whips. The whip had a short wooden stock, braided over with leather, and was loaded at the butt. The lash was 3 feet long or thereabouts, and made of rawhide strands. At first I was somewhat frightened, and my impulse was to run. There was no one about except Rachel, the cook, and Chapin's wife, and neither of them were to be seen. The rest were in the field. I knew he intended to whip me, and it was the first time anyone had attempted it since my arrival at Avoyelles. I felt, moreover, that I had been faithful, that I was guilty of no wrong whatever, and deserved commendation rather than punishment. My fear changed to anger, and before he reached me, I had made up my mind fully not to be whipped. Let the result be life or death. Winding the lash around his hand and taking hold of the small end of the stock, he walked up to me, and with a malignant look, ordered me to strip. "Master Tibiats," said I, looking him boldly in the face, "I will not." I was about to say something further in justification, but with concentrated vengeance he sprang upon me, seizing me by the throat with one hand, raising the whip with the other in the act of striking. Before the blow descended, however, I had caught him by the collar of the coat and drawn him closely to me. Reaching down, I seized him by the ankle and pushing him back with the other hand. He fell over on the ground, putting one arm around his leg and holding it to my breast, so that his head and shoulders only touched the ground. I placed my foot upon his neck. He was completely in my power. My blood was up. It seemed to course through my veins like fire. In the frenzy of my madness, I snatched the whip from his hand. He struggled with all his power, swore that I should not live to see another day, and that he would tear out my heart. But his struggles and his threats were alike in vain. I cannot tell how many times I struck him. Blow after blow fell fast and heavy upon his wriggling form. At length he screamed, cried murder, and at last the blasphemous tyrant called on God for mercy. But he who had never shown mercy did not receive it. The stiff stock of the whip warped round his cringing body until my right arm ached. Until this time I had been too busy to look about me. Desisting for a moment, I saw Mrs. Chapin looking from the window and Rachel standing in the kitchen door. Their attitudes expressed the utmost excitement and alarm. His screams had been heard in the field. Chapin was coming as fast as he could ride. I struck him a blow or two more, then pushed him from me with such a well-directed kick that he went rolling over on the ground. Rising to his feet and brushing the dirt from his hair, he stood looking at me, pale with rage. We gazed at each other in silence. Not a word was uttered until Chapin galloped up to us. "What is the matter?" he cried out. "Master Tibiats wants to whip me for using the nails he gave me," I replied. "What is the matter with the nails?" he inquired, turning to Tibiats. Tibiats answered to the effect that they were too large, paying little heed, however, to Chapin's question, but still keeping his snakish eyes fastened maliciously on me. "I am overseer here," Chapin began. "I told Platt to take them and use them, and if they were not of the proper size, I would get others on returning from the field. It is not his fault. Besides, I shall furnish such nails as I please. I hope you will understand that, Mr. Tibiats." Tibiats made no reply, but, grinding his teeth and shaking his fist, swore he would have satisfaction, and that it was not half over yet. Thereupon he walked away, followed by the overseer, and entered the house, the latter talking to them all the while in a suppressed tone and with earnest gestures. I remained where I was, doubting whether it was better to fly or abide the result, whatever it might be. Presently Tibiats came out of the house and, saddling his horse, the only property he possessed besides myself, departed on the road to Cheneyville. When he was gone, Chapin came out visibly excited, telling me not to stir, not to attempt to leave the plantation on any account whatever. He then went to the kitchen and, calling Rachel out, conversed with her some time. Coming back, he again charged me with great earnestness not to run, saying my master was a rascal, that he had left on no good errand, and that there might be trouble before night. But at all events, he insisted upon it, I must not stir. As I stood there, feelings of unutterable agony overwhelmed me. I was conscious that I had subjected myself to unimaginable punishment. The reaction that followed my extreme ebullition of anger produced the most painful sensations of regret. An unfriended, helpless slave, what could I do? What could I say to justify, in the remotest manner, the heinous act I had committed of resenting a white man's contumely and abuse? I tried to pray, I tried to beseech my Heavenly Father to sustain me in my sore extremity. But emotion choked my utterance, and I could only bow my head upon my hands and weep. For at least an hour I remained in this situation, finding relief only in tears. When looking up, I beheld Tibiats, accompanied by 2 horsemen, coming down the bayou. They rode into the yard, jumped from their horses, and approached me with large whips, one of them also carrying a coil of rope. "Cross your hands," commanded Tibiats, with the addition of such a shuddering expression of blasphemy as is not decorous to repeat. "You need not bind me, Master Tibiats. I am ready to go with you anywhere," said I. One of his companions then stepped forward, swearing if I made the least resistance, he would break my head, he would tear me limb from limb, he would cut my black throat, and giving wide scope to other similar expressions. Perceiving any importunity altogether vain, I crossed my hands, submitting humbly to whatever disposition they might please to make of me. Thereupon Tibiats tied my wrists, drawing the rope around them with his utmost strength. Then he bound my ankles in the same manner. In the meantime, the other 2 had slipped a cord within my elbows, running it across my back and tying it firmly. It was utterly impossible to move hand or foot. With the remaining piece of rope, Tibiats made an awkward noose and placed it about my neck. "Now then," inquired one of Tibiats' companions, "where shall we hang the nigger?" One proposed such a limb, extending from the body of a peach tree, near the spot where we were standing. His comrade objected to it, alleging it would break, and proposed another. Finally, they fixed upon the latter. During this conversation, and all the time they were binding me, I uttered not a word. Overseer Chapin, during the progress of the scene, was walking hastily back and forth on the piazza. Rachel was crying by the kitchen door, and Mrs. Chapin was still looking from the window. Hope died within my heart. Surely my time had come. I should never behold the light of another day, never behold the faces of my children, the sweet anticipation I had cherished with such fondness. I should that hour struggle through the fearful agonies of death. None would mourn for me, none revenge me. Soon my form would be moldering in that distant soil, or perhaps be cast to the slimy reptiles that filled the stagnant waters of the bayou. Tears flowed down my cheeks, but they only afforded a subject of insulting comment for my executioners. At length, as they were dragging me towards a tree, Chapin, who had momentarily disappeared from the piazza, came out of the house and walked towards us. He had a pistol in each hand, and as near as I can now recall to mind, spoke in a firm, determined manner as follows. "Gentlemen, I have a few words to say. You had better listen to them. Whoever moves that slave another foot from where he stands is a dead man. In the first place, he does not deserve this treatment. It is a shame to murder him in this manner. I never knew a more faithful boy than Platt. You, Tibiats, are in the fault yourself. You are pretty much a scoundrel, and I know it, and you richly deserve the flogging you have received. In the next place, I have been overseer on this plantation 7 years, and, in the absence of William Ford, am master here. My duty is to protect his interests, and that duty I shall perform. You are not responsible. You are a worthless fellow. Ford holds a mortgage on Platt of $400. If you hang him, he loses his debt. Until that is canceled, you have no right to take his life. You have no right to take it anyway. There is a law for the slave as well as for the white man. You are no better than a murderer. As for you," addressing Cook and Ramsey, a couple of overseers from neighboring plantations, "as for you, begone. If you have any regard for your own safety, I say begone." Cook and Ramsey, without a further word, mounted their horses and rode away. Tibiats, in a few minutes, evidently in fear and overawed by the decided tone of Chapin, sneaked off like a coward, as he was, and mounting his horse, followed his companions. I remained standing where I was still bound, with the rope around my neck. As soon as they were gone, Chapin called Rachel, ordering her to run to the field and tell Lawson to hurry to the house without delay, and bring the brown mule with him, an animal much prized for its unusual fleetness. Presently the boy appeared. "Lawson," said Chapin, "you must go to the pine woods. Tell your master Ford to come here at once, that he must not delay a single moment. Tell him they are trying to murder Platt. Now hurry, boy. Be at the pine woods by noon if you kill the mule." Chapin stepped into the house and wrote a pass. When he returned, Lawson was at the door, mounted on his mule. Receiving the pass, he plied the whip right smartly to the beast, dashed out of the yard, and turning up the bayou on a hard gallop, in less time than it has taken me to describe the scene, was out of sight. In Chapter 8, survival takes a violent turn. Solomon Northup, Platt to his oppressors, faces not the faceless cruelty of a system, but the personal malice of John M. Tibiats. Tibiats is no master of men. He is a small man with a fragile ego, threatened by Solomon's skill and desperate to reassert control. And so he does what men like him always do. When power slips through their fingers, he reaches for violence. It begins with an insult, then an order. Then the tools in Solomon's hands become weapons. Because when Tibiats threatens to whip him unjustly, Solomon refuses to submit. He fights back. He throws him down. He wrestles away the whip. He dares, even for a moment, to reclaim his dignity. And for that, he signs his own death sentence. The whip is more than a tool. It is a ritual object in the slaveholder's theology. To resist the whip is to resist the entire system. Solomon's act is not just defiance of Tibiats. It's defiance of slavery itself. And the punishment for such blasphemy is death. But fate intervenes. Ford's overseer arrives, and Solomon is saved. For now, still, the threat lingers. Tibiats is not done, and men like him, humiliated and angry, become dangerous predators in the night. Free men enslaved faced an unbearable irony. They knew the law, they knew their rights, but they were surrounded by a world that denied them. Solomon's choice to fight back was not just instinct, it was memory of freedom, memory of manhood. But history tells us, for every act of resistance in bondage, there is a price, and often that price is paid in flesh and silence. What is striking is not just the fight, but the aftermath. Solomon does not revel in his defiance. He does not boast. He waits. He fears. He calculates. Because the world he lives in does not reward bravery. It punishes it with rope, fire, or worse. This is not just physical survival. This is psychological warfare. To resist and then pretend you never did. To live invisibly, even while rage boils beneath the skin. In chapter 8, Northup crosses a line between obedience and identity. He raises his hands, not in surrender, but in self-defense. And in that moment, he reminds us, even in chains, even in terror, the will to fight still burns. But in the world of slavery, even the smallest spark can summon the gallows, and Tibiats isn't finished. Chapter 9. As the sun approached the meridian, that day it became insufferably warm. Its hot rays scorched the ground. The earth almost blistered the foot that stood upon it. I was without coat or hat, standing bareheaded, exposed to its burning blaze. Great drops of perspiration rolled down my face, drenching the scanty apparel wherewith I was clothed. Over the fence, a very little way off, the peach trees cast their cool, delicious shadows on the grass. I would gladly have given a long year of service to have been enabled to exchange the heated oven, as it were, wherein I stood, for a seat beneath their branches. But I was yet bound, the rope still dangling from my neck, and standing in the same tracks where Tibiats and his comrades left me. I could not move an inch, so firmly had I been bound. To have been enabled to lean against the weaving house would have been a luxury indeed. But it was far beyond my reach, though distant less than 20 feet. I wanted to lie down, but knew I could not rise again. The ground was so parched and boiling hot, I was aware it would but add to the discomfort of my situation. If I could have only moved my position, however slightly, it would have been relief unspeakable. But the hot rays of a southern sun, beating all the long summer day on my bare head, produced not half the suffering I experienced from my aching limbs. My wrists and ankles and the cords of my legs and arms began to swell, burying the rope that bound them into the swollen flesh. All day Chapin walked back and forth upon the stoop, but not once approached me. He appeared to be in a state of great uneasiness, looking first towards me and then up the road, as if expecting some arrival every moment. He did not go to the field, as was his custom. It was evident from his manner that he supposed Tibiats would return with more and better armed assistance, perhaps, to renew the quarrel, and it was equally evident he had prepared his mind to defend my life at whatever hazard. Why he did not relieve me, why he suffered me to remain in agony the whole weary day, I never knew. It was not for want of sympathy, I am certain. Perhaps he wished forward to see the rope about my neck, and the brutal manner in which I had been bound. Perhaps his interference with another's property in which he had no legal interest might have been a trespass, which would have subjected him to the penalty of the law. Why Tibiats was all day absent was another mystery I never could divine. He knew well enough that Chapin would not harm him unless he persisted in his design against me. Lawson told me afterwards that as he passed the plantation of John David Cheney, he saw the three, and that they turned and looked after him as he flew by. I think his supposition was that Lawson had been sent out by Overseer Chapin to arouse the neighboring planters and to call on them to come to his assistance. He therefore undoubtedly acted on the principle that discretion is the better part of valor, and kept away. But whatever motive may have governed the cowardly and malignant tyrant, it is of no importance. There I still stood in the noontide sun, groaning with pain. From long before daylight, I had not eaten a morsel. I was growing faint from pain and thirst and hunger. Once only, in the very hottest portion of the day, Rachel, half fearful she was acting contrary to the overseer's wishes, ventured to me and held a cup of water to my lips. The humble creature never knew, nor could she comprehend if she had heard them, the blessings I invoked upon her for that balmy draught. She could only say, "Oh, Platt, how I do pity you," and then hastened back to her labors in the kitchen. Never did the sun move so slowly through the heavens, never did it shower down such fervent and fiery rays as it did that day. At least, so it appeared to me. What my meditations were, the innumerable thoughts that thronged through my distracted brain, I will not attempt to give expression to. Suffice it to say, during the whole long day, I came not to the conclusion, even once, that the Southern slave, fed, clothed, whipped, and protected by his master, is happier than the free, colored citizen of the North. To that conclusion, I have never since arrived. There are many, however, even in the Northern states, benevolent and well-disposed men who will pronounce my opinion erroneous and gravely proceed to substantiate the assertion with an argument. Alas, they have never drunk, as I have, from the bitter cup of slavery. Just at sunset, my heart leaped with unbounded joy as Ford came riding into the yard, his horse covered with foam. Chapin met him at the door, and after conversing a short time, he walked directly to me. "Poor Platt, you are in a bad state," was the only expression that escaped his lips. "Thank God," said I. "Thank God, Master Ford, that you have come at last." Drawing a knife from his pocket, he indignantly cut the cord from my wrists, arms, and ankles and slipped the noose from my neck. I attempted to walk, but staggered like a drunken man and fell partially to the ground. Ford returned immediately to the house, leaving me alone again. As he reached the piazza, Tibiats and his two friends rode up. A long dialogue followed. I could hear the sound of their voices, the mild tones of Ford mingling with the angry accents of Tibiats, but was unable to distinguish what was said. Finally, the three departed again, apparently not well pleased. I endeavored to raise the hammer, thinking to show Ford how willing I was to work by proceeding with my labors on the weaving house. But it fell from my nerveless hand. At dark, I crawled into the cabin and lay down. I was in great misery, all sore and swollen, the slightest movement producing excruciating suffering. Soon the hands came in from the field. Rachel, when she went after Lawson, had told them what had happened. Eliza and Mary broiled me a piece of bacon, but my appetite was gone. Then they scorched some cornmeal and made coffee. It was all that I could take. Eliza consoled me and was very kind. It was not long before the cabin was full of slaves. They gathered round me, asking many questions about the difficulty with Tibiats in the morning and the particulars of all the occurrences of the day. Then Rachel came in and in her simple language repeated it over again, dwelling emphatically on the kick that sent Tibiats rolling over on the ground, whereupon there was a general titter throughout the crowd. Then she described how Chapin walked out with his pistols and rescued me, and how Master Ford cut the ropes with his knife, just as if he was mad. By this time Lawson had returned. He had to regale them with an account of his trip to the pine woods, how the brown mule bore him faster than a streak o' lightning, how he astonished everybody as he flew along, how Master Ford started right away, how he said Platt was good nigger, and they shouldn't kill him, concluding with pretty strong intimations that there was not another human being in the wide world who could have created such a universal sensation on the road, or performed such a marvelous John Gilpin feat as he had done that day on the brown mule. The kind creatures loaded me with the expression of their sympathy, saying Tibiats was a hard, cruel man, and hoping Massa Ford would get me back again. In this manner they passed the time, discussing, chatting, talking over and over again the exciting affair, until suddenly Chapin presented himself at the cabin door and called me. "Platt," said he, "you will sleep on the floor in the great house tonight. Bring your blanket with you." I arose as quickly as I was able, took my blanket in my hand, and followed him. On the way, he informed me that he should not wonder if Tibiats was back again before morning, that he intended to kill me, and that he did not mean he should do it without witnesses. Had he stabbed me to the heart in the presence of 100 slaves, not one of them, by the laws of Louisiana, could have given evidence against him. I laid down on the floor in the great house the first and the last time such a sumptuous resting place was granted me during my 12 years of bondage, and tried to sleep. Near midnight, the dog began to bark. Chapin arose, looked from a window, but could discover nothing. At length, the dog was quiet. As he returned to his room, he said, "I believe, Platt, that scoundrel is skulking about the premises somewhere. If the dog barks again and I am sleeping, wake me." I promised to do so. After the lapse of an hour or more, the dog recommenced his clamor, running towards the gate, then back again, all the while barking furiously. Chapin was out of bed without waiting to be called. On this occasion, he stepped forth upon the piazza and remained standing there a considerable length of time. Nothing, however, was to be seen, and the dog returned to his kennel. We were not disturbed again during the night. The excessive pain that I suffered and the dread of some impending danger prevented any rest whatever. Whether or not Tibiats did actually return to the plantation that night, seeking an opportunity to wreak his vengeance upon me, is a secret known only to himself, perhaps. I thought then, however, and have the strong impression still, that he was there. At all events, he had the disposition of an assassin cowering before a brave man's words, but ready to strike his helpless or unsuspecting victim in the back, as I had reason afterwards to know. At daylight in the morning, I arose, sore and weary, having rested little. Nevertheless, after partaking breakfast, which Mary and Eliza had prepared for me in the cabin, I proceeded to the weaving house and commenced the labors of another day. It was Chapin's practice, as it is the practice of overseers generally, immediately on arising, to bestride his horse, always saddled and bridled, and ready for him the particular business of some slave, and ride into the field. This morning, on the contrary, he came to the weaving house, asking if I had seen anything of Tibiats yet. Replying in the negative, he remarked there was something not right about the fellow, there was bad blood in him, that I must keep a sharp watch on him, or he would do me wrong some day when I least expected it. While he was yet speaking, Tibiats rode in, hitched his horse, and entered the house. I had little fear of him while Ford and Chapin were at hand, but they could not be near me always. Oh, how heavily the weight of slavery pressed upon me then. I must toil day after day, endure abuse and taunts and scoffs, sleep on the hard ground, live on the coarsest fare, and not only this, but live the slave of a blood-seeking wretch, of whom I must stand henceforth in continued fear and dread. Why had I not died in my young years, before God had given me children to love and live for? What unhappiness and suffering and sorrow it would have prevented. I sighed for liberty, but the bondman's chain was round me and could not be shaken off. I could only gaze wistfully toward the north and think of the thousands of miles that stretched between me and the soil of freedom, over which a black freeman may not pass. Tibiats, in the course of half an hour, walked over to the weaving house, looked at me sharply, then returned without saying anything. Most of the forenoon he sat on the piazza, reading a newspaper and conversing with Ford. After dinner, the latter left for the pine woods, and it was indeed with regret that I beheld him depart from the plantation. Once more, during the day, Tibiats came to me, gave me some order, and returned. During the week, the weaving house was completed, Tibiats in the meantime making no allusion whatever to the difficulty when I was informed he had hired me to Peter Tanner, to work under another carpenter by the name of Myers. This announcement was received with gratification, as any place was desirable that would relieve me of his hateful presence. Peter Tanner, as the reader has already been informed, lived on the opposite shore and was the brother of Mistress Ford. He is one of the most extensive planters on Bayou Boeuf and owns a large number of slaves. Over I went to Tanner's joyfully enough. He had heard of my late difficulties. In fact, I ascertained the flogging of Tibiats was soon blazoned far and wide. This affair, together with my rafting experiment, had rendered me somewhat notorious. More than once I heard it said that Platt Ford, now Platt Tibiats, a slave's name changes with his change of master, was a devil of a nigger. But I was destined to make a still further noise, as will presently be seen, throughout the little world of Bayou Boeuf. Peter Tanner endeavored to impress upon me the idea that he was quite severe, though I could perceive there was a vein of good humor in the old fellow. After all, "You're the nigger," he said to me on my arrival. "You're the nigger that flogged your master, eh? You're the nigger that kicks and holds Carpenter Tibiats by the leg and wallops him. Are ye? I'd like to see you hold me by the leg, I should. You're a portent character, you're a great nigger, very remarkable nigger. Ain't ye? I'd lash you, I'd take the tantrums out of ye. Just take hold of my leg, if you please. None of your pranks here, my boy. Remember that. Now go to work, you kickin' rascal," concluded Peter Tanner, unable to suppress a half-comical grin at his own wit and sarcasm. After listening to this salutation, I was taken charge of by Myers and labored under his direction for a month, to his and my own satisfaction. Like William Ford, his brother-in-law, Tanner was in the habit of reading the Bible to his slaves on the Sabbath, but in a somewhat different spirit. He was an impressive commentator on the New Testament. The first Sunday after my coming to the plantation, he called them together and began to read the 12th chapter of Luke. When he came to the 47th verse, he looked deliberately around him and continued, "And that servant which knew his Lord's will." Here he paused, looking around more deliberately than before, and again proceeded, "which knew his Lord's will, and prepared not himself." Here was another pause, "prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes." "Do ye hear that?" demanded Peter emphatically. "Stripes," he repeated, slowly and distinctly, taking off his spectacles, preparatory to making a few remarks. "That nigger that don't take care, that don't obey his Lord, that's his master, d'ye see? That ere nigger shall be beaten with many stripes." Now, many signifies a great many, 40, 100, 150 lashes. That's scripture, and so Peter continued to elucidate the subject for a great length of time, much to the edification of his sable audience. At the conclusion of the exercises, calling up 3 of his slaves, Warner, Will, and Major, he cried out to me, "Here, Platt, you held Tibiats by the legs. Now see if you can hold these rascals in the same way, till I get back from eating." Thereupon he ordered them to the stocks, a common thing on plantations in the Red River country. The stocks are formed of 2 planks, the lower one made fast at the ends to 2 short posts, driven firmly into the ground. At regular distances, half circles are cut in the upper edge. The other plank is fastened to one of the posts by a hinge, so that it can be opened or shut down, in the same manner as the blade of a pocket knife is shut or opened. In the lower edge of the upper plank, corresponding half circles are also cut, so that when they close, a row of holes is formed large enough to admit a Negro's leg above the ankle, but not large enough to enable him to draw out his foot. The other end of the upper plank, opposite the hinge, is fastened to its post by lock and key. The slave is made to sit upon the ground. When the uppermost plank is elevated, his legs, just above the ankles, placed in the sub-half circles, and shutting it down again and locking it, he is held secure and fast. Very often the neck, instead of the ankle, is enclosed. In this manner they are held during the operation of whipping. Warner, Will, and Major, according to Tanner's account of them, were melon-stealing, Sabbath-breaking niggers, and not approving of such wickedness. He felt it his duty to put them in the stocks. Handing me the key, himself, Myers, Mistress Tanner and the children entered the carriage and drove away to church at Cheneyville. When they were gone, the boys begged me to let them out. I felt sorry to see them sitting on the hot ground and remembered my own sufferings in the sun. Upon their promise to return to the stocks at any moment they were required to do so, I consented to release them, grateful for the lenity shown them. And in order in some measure to repay it, they could do no less, of course, than pilot me to the melon patch. Shortly before Tanner's return, they were in the stocks again. Finally, he drove up and, looking at the boys, said with a chuckle, "Ah, ye haven't been strolling about much today anyway. I'll teach you what's what. I'll tire ye of eating watermelons on the Lord's day, ye Sabbath-breaking niggers." Peter Tanner prided himself upon his strict religious observances. He was a deacon in the church. But I have now reached a point in the progress of my narrative when it becomes necessary to turn away from these light descriptions to the more grave and weighty matter of the second battle with Master Tibiats and the flight through the great Pacudry swamp. Chapter 9 opens with a death sentence. Solomon Northup, branded Platt, punished for his pride, now faces the full wrath of humiliation. Tibiats has returned, this time not with commands or insults, but with a noose. No court, no hearing, no crime but dignity. This chapter is the closest Solomon has come to dying, and worse, to being erased without a trace. There is a tree, a rope, and 3 white men with murder in their eyes. They drag Solomon, they tie the knot, they throw it over the limb, and the world stands still. In that moment, his feet barely scraping the dirt, time folds in on itself. This isn't just execution. It's a message. A man who lifts a hand to his master, even in defense, must be made to disappear. The terror of this chapter isn't in screaming. It's in waiting, because as the rope tightens and the killers vanish into the trees, Solomon is left dangling, barely alive. The sun moves across the sky. Children play nearby. Slaves pass, watching in silence, but doing nothing, because they can do nothing. To intervene is to hang beside him, and so the world turns, indifferent to his slow suffocation. The noose is more than a weapon. It is a signal, a reminder that control is not maintained through rules, but through fear. Solomon isn't killed, but he's meant to be broken, left hanging for hours, on the edge of breath and oblivion. He is taught viscerally that resistance is death, and every slave who sees him that day learns the same lesson, not from words, but from the sway of a rope in the breeze. This chapter is a chilling reflection of extrajudicial violence. Tibiats didn't need permission. He didn't face consequences, because enslaved people, under the law, were not people at all. And even when Ford's overseer finally cuts Solomon down, he's not rescued. He's just allowed to survive. This wasn't mercy. It was management. A damaged slave is a poor investment. And yet, Solomon survives. His throat bruised, his body exhausted, his soul rattling inside him like a trapped bird, but still intact. There's a scene, brief but powerful, where Solomon drinks water afterward. It seems simple, but in that moment, it is a ritual of rebirth. The world tried to erase him, and still, he drinks, he breathes, he lives. He is not free, but he is not dead. In chapter 9, Solomon meets the rope and returns, but something inside him changes. He has faced the very edge of nothing. He has seen how quickly a man can become a corpse in the grass. And now, he understands, you must not only survive the body, you must survive the mind, because in this world, dying is easy. But continuing to live, knowing they want you dead, is the greatest rebellion of all. Chapter 10. At the end of a month, my services being no longer required at Tanner's, I was sent over the bayou again to my master, whom I found engaged in building the cotton press. This was situated at some distance from the great house, in a rather retired place. I commenced working once more in company with Tibiats, being entirely alone with him most part of the time. I remembered the words of Chapin, his precautions, his advice to beware lest in some unsuspecting moment he might injure me. They were always in my mind, so that I lived in a most uneasy state of apprehension and fear. One, I was on my work, the other on my master. I determined to give him no cause of offense, to work still more diligently if possible than I had done, to bear whatever abuse he might heap upon me, save bodily injury, humbly and patiently, hoping thereby to soften in some degree his manner toward me, until the blessed time might come when I should be delivered from his clutches. The third morning after my return, Chapin left the plantation for Cheneyville, to be absent until night. Tibiats on that morning was attacked with one of those periodical fits of spleen and ill humor to which he was frequently subject, rendering him still more disagreeable and venomous than usual. It was about 9 o'clock in the forenoon when I was busily employed with the jack plane on one of the sweeps. Tibiats was standing by the workbench, fitting a handle into the chisel, with which he had been engaged previously in cutting the thread of the screw. "You are not planing that down enough," said he. "It is just even with the line," I replied. "You're a liar," he exclaimed passionately. "Oh, well, master," I said mildly. "I will plane it down more if you say so," at the same time proceeding to do as I supposed he desired. Before one shaving had been removed, however, he cried out, saying I had now planed it too deep, it was too small, I had spoiled the sweep entirely. Then followed curses and imprecations. I had endeavored to do exactly as he directed, but nothing would satisfy the unreasonable man. In silence and in dread, I stood by the sweep, holding the jack plane in my hand, not knowing what to do, and not daring to be idle. His anger grew more and more violent, until finally, with an oath, such a bitter, frightful oath as only Tibiats could utter, he seized a hatchet from the workbench and darted toward me, swearing he would cut my head open. It was a moment of life or death. The sharp, bright blade of the hatchet glittered in the sun. In another instant it would be buried in my brain. And yet in that instant so quick will a man's thoughts come to him in such a fearful strait, I reasoned with myself. If I stood still, my doom was certain. If I fled, 10 chances to 1 the hatchet, flying from his hand with a too deadly and unerring aim, would strike me in the back. There was but one course to take, springing towards him with all my power and meeting him full halfway before he could bring down the blow. With one hand I caught his uplifted arm, with the other seized him by the throat. We stood looking each other in the eyes. In his eye could see murder. I felt as if I had a serpent by the neck, watching the slightest relaxation of my gripe to coil itself around my body, crushing and stinging it to death. I thought to scream aloud, trusting that some ear might catch the sound, but Chapin was away. The hands were in the field. There was no living soul in sight or hearing. The good genius, which thus far through life has saved me from the hands of violence, at that moment suggested a lucky thought. With a vigorous and sudden kick that brought him on one knee, with a groan, I released my hold upon his throat, snatched the hatchet, and cast it beyond reach. Frantic with rage, maddened beyond control, he seized a white oak stick 5 feet long perhaps, and as large in circumference as his hand could grasp, which was lying on the ground. Again he rushed towards me, and again I met him, seized him about the waist, and being the stronger of the two, bore him to the earth. While in that position I obtained possession of the stick, and rising, cast it from me. Also, he likewise arose and ran for the broad axe on the workbench. Fortunately, there was a heavy plank lying upon its broad blade, in such a manner that he could not extricate it, before I had sprung upon his back, pressing him down closely and heavily on the plank, so that the axe was held more firmly to its place. I endeavored, but in vain, to break his grasp upon the handle. In that position we remained some minutes. There have been hours in my unhappy life, many of them, when the contemplation of death as the end of earthly sorrow of the grave, as a resting place for the tired and worn-out body, has been pleasant to dwell upon. But such contemplations vanish in the hour of peril. No man in his full strength can stand undismayed in the presence of the King of Terrors. Life is dear to every living thing. The worm that crawls upon the ground will struggle for it. At that moment, it was dear to me, enslaved and treated as I was, not able to unloose his hand. Once more I seize him by the throat, and this time with a vice-like gripe that soon relaxed his hold. He became pliant and unstrung. His face, that had been white with passion, was now black from suffocation. Those small serpent eyes that spat such venom were now full of horror, two great white orbs starting from their sockets. There was a lurking devil in my heart that prompted me to kill the human bloodhound on the spot to retain the grip on his accursed throat till the breath of life was gone. I dared not murder him, and I dared not let him live. If I killed him, my life must pay the forfeit if he lived. My life only would satisfy his vengeance. A voice within whispered me to fly, to be a wanderer among the swamps, a fugitive and a vagabond on the face of the earth, was preferable to the life that I was leading. My resolution was soon formed, and swinging him from the workbench to the ground, I leaped a fence nearby and hurried across the plantation, passing the slaves at work in the cotton field. At the end of a quarter of a mile, I reached the wood pasture, and it was a short time indeed that I had been running it. Climbing onto a high fence, I could see the cotton press, the great house, and the space between. It was a conspicuous position, from whence the whole plantation was in view. I saw Tibiats cross the field toward the house, and enter it. Then he came out, carrying his saddle, and presently mounted his horse and galloped away. I was desolate but thankful that my life was spared, desolate and discouraged with the prospect before me. What would become of me? Who would befriend me? Whither should I fly? O God, thou who gavest me life and implanted in my bosom the love of life, who filled it with emotion such as other men, thy creatures, do not forsake me. Have pity on the poor slave, let me not perish. If thou dost not protect me, I am lost. Such supplications, silently and unuttered, ascended from my inmost heart to heaven. But there was no answering voice, no sweet, low tone, coming down from on high, whispering to my soul, "It is I be not afraid." I was the forsaken of God. It seemed the despised and hated of men. In about 3/4 of an hour, several of the slaves shouted and made signs for me to run. Presently, looking up the bayou, I saw Tibiats and 2 others on horseback coming at a fast gait, followed by a troop of dogs. There were as many as 8 or 10. Distant as I was, I knew them. They belonged on the adjoining plantation. The dogs used on Bayou Burf for hunting slaves are a kind of bloodhound, but a far more savage breed than is found in the northern states. They will attack a Negro at their master's bidding and cling to him as the common bulldog will cling to a 4-footed animal. Frequently, their loud bay is heard in the swamps. And then there is speculation as to what point the runaway will be overhauled the same as a New York hunter stops to listen to the hounds coursing along the hillsides and suggests to his companion that the fox will be taken at such a place. I never knew a slave escaping with his life from Bayou Burf. One reason is they are not allowed to learn the art of swimming and are incapable of crossing the most inconsiderable stream. In their flight, they can go in no direction but a little way without coming to a bayou, when the inevitable alternative is presented of being drowned or overtaken by the dogs. In youth, I had practiced in the clear streams that flow through my native district until I had become an expert swimmer and felt at home in the watery element. I stood upon the fence until the dogs had reached the cotton press. In an instant more, their long, savage yells announced they were on my track. Leaping down from my position, I ran towards the swamp. Fear gave me strength, and I exerted it to the utmost. Every few moments I could hear the yelpings of the dogs. They were gaining upon me. Every howl was nearer and nearer. Each moment I expected they would spring upon my back, expected to feel their long teeth sinking into my flesh. There were so many of them. I knew they would tear me to pieces, that they would worry me at once to death. I gasped for breath, gasped forth a half-uttered, choking prayer to the Almighty to save me, to give me strength to reach some wide, deep bayou where I could throw them off the track or sink into its waters. Presently, I reached a thick palmetto bottom. As I fled through them, they made a loud rustling noise, not loud enough, however, to drown the voices of the dogs. Continuing my course due south, as nearly as I can judge, I came at length to water just over shoe. The hounds at that moment could not have been 5 rods behind me. I could hear them crashing and plunging through the palmettos, their loud, eager yells making the whole swamp clamorous with the sound. Hope revived a little as I reached the water. If it were only deeper, they might lose the scent, and thus disconcerted, afford me the opportunity of evading them. Luckily, it grew deeper the farther. I proceeded, now over my ankles, now halfway to my knees, now sinking a moment to my waist, and then emerging presently into more shallow places. The dogs had not gained upon me since I struck the water. Evidently, they were confused. Now their savage intonations grew more and more distant, assuring me that I was leaving them. Finally, I stopped to listen, but the long howl came booming on the air again, telling me I was not yet safe. From bog to bog, where I had stepped, they could still keep upon the track, though impeded by the water. At length, to my great joy, I came to a wide bayou, and plunging in, had soon stemmed its sluggish current to the other side. There certainly the dogs would be confounded, the current carrying down the stream all traces of that slight, mysterious scent, which enables the quick-smelling hound to follow in the track of the fugitive. After crossing this bayou, the water became so deep I could not run. I was now in what I afterwards learned was the Great Pacudry Swamp. It was filled with immense trees, the sycamore, the gum, the cottonwood, and cypress, and extends, I am informed, to the shore of the Calcasieu River. For 30 or 40 miles it is without inhabitants, save wild beasts, the bear, the wildcat, the tiger, and great slimy reptiles that are crawling through it everywhere. Long before I reached the bayou, in fact, from the time I struck the water until I emerged from the swamp on my return, these reptiles surrounded me. I saw hundreds of moccasin snakes. Every log and bog, every trunk of a fallen tree, over which I was compelled to step or climb, was alive with them. They crawled away at my approach, but sometimes in my haste, I almost placed my hand or foot upon them. They are poisonous serpents, their bite more fatal than the rattlesnakes. Besides, I had lost one shoe, the sole having come entirely off, leaving the upper only dangling to my ankle. I saw also many alligators, great and small, lying in the water or on pieces of floodwood. The noise I made usually startled them when they moved off and plunged into the deepest places. Sometimes, however, I would come directly upon a monster before observing it. In such cases, I would start back, run a short way around, and in that manner shun them. Straightforward, they will run a short distance rapidly, but do not possess the power of turning. In a crooked race, there is no difficulty in evading them. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I heard the last of the hounds. Probably they did not cross the bayou. Wet and weary, but relieved from the sense of instant peril, I continued on, more cautious and afraid, however, of the snakes and alligators than I had been in the earlier portion of my flight. Now, before stepping into a muddy pool, I would strike the water with a stick. If the waters moved, I would go around it. If not, would venture through. At length the sun went down, and gradually night's trailing mantle shrouded the great swamp in darkness. Still I staggered on, fearing every instant I should feel the dreadful sting of the moccasin, or be crushed within the jaws of some disturbed alligator. The dread of them now almost equaled the fear of the pursuing hounds. The moon arose after a time, its mild light creeping through the overspreading branches, loaded with long, pendant moss. I kept traveling forwards until after midnight, hoping all the while that I would soon emerge into some less desolate and dangerous region. But the water grew deeper and the walking more difficult than ever. I perceived it would be impossible to proceed much farther, and knew not, moreover, what hands I might fall into, should I succeed in reaching a human habitation. Not provided with a pass, any white man would be at liberty to arrest me and place me in prison until such time as my master should prove property, pay charges, and take me away. I was an estray, and if so unfortunate as to meet a law-abiding citizen of Louisiana, he would deem it his duty to his neighbor, perhaps, to put me forthwith in the pound. Really, it was difficult to determine which I had most reason to fear: dogs, alligators, or men. After midnight, however, I came to a halt. Imagination cannot picture the dreariness of the scene. The swamp was resonant with the quacking of innumerable ducks. Since the foundation of the earth, in all probability, a human footstep had never before so far penetrated the recesses of the swamp. It was not silent, now silent to a degree that rendered it oppressive, as it was when the sun was shining in the heavens. My midnight intrusion had awakened the feather tribes, which seemed to throng the morass in hundreds of thousands, and their garrulous throats poured forth such multitudinous sounds. There was such a fluttering of wings, such sullen plunges in the water all around me, that I was affrighted and appalled. All the fowls of the air and all the creeping things of the earth appeared to have assembled together in that particular place, for the purpose of filling it with clamor and confusion. Not by human dwellings, not in crowded cities alone, are the sights and sounds of life. The wildest places of the earth are full of them. Even in the heart of that dismal swamp, God had provided a refuge and a dwelling place for millions of living things. The moon had now risen above the trees when I resolved upon a new project. Thus far, I had endeavored to travel as nearly south as possible. Turning about, I proceeded in a northwest direction, my object being to strike the pine woods in the vicinity of Master Ford's. Once within the shadow of his protection, I felt I would be comparatively safe. My clothes were in tatters, my hands, face, and body covered with scratches, received from the sharp knots of fallen trees, and in climbing over piles of brush and floodwood. My bare foot was full of thorns. I was besmeared with muck and mud, and the green slime that had collected on the surface of the dead water, in which I had been immersed to the neck many times during the day and night. Hour after hour, and tiresome indeed had they become, I continued to plod along on my northwest course. The water began to grow less deep, and the ground more firm under my feet. At last I reached the Pacudry, the same wide bayou I had swam while outward bound. I swam it again, and shortly after thought I heard a cock crow, but the sound was faint, and it might have been a mockery of the ear. The water receded from my advancing footsteps. Now I had left the bogs behind me. Now I was on dry land that gradually ascended to the plain, and I knew I was somewhere in the great pine woods. Just at daybreak, I came to an opening, a sort of small plantation, but one I had never seen before. In the edge of the woods, I came upon two men, a slave and his young master, engaged in catching wild hogs. The white men I knew would demand my pass, and not able to give him one, would take me into possession. I was too wearied to run again, and too desperate to be taken, and therefore adopted a ruse that proved entirely successful. Assuming a fierce expression, I walked directly towards him, looking him steadily in the face. As I approached, he moved backwards with an air of alarm. It was plain he was much affrighted, that he looked upon me as some infernal goblin, just arisen from the bowels of the swamp. "Where does William Ford live?" I demanded in no gentle tone. "He lives 7 miles from here," was the reply. "Which is the way to his place?" I again demanded, trying to look more fiercely than ever. "Do you see those pine trees yonder?" he asked, pointing to two, a mile distant, that rose far above their fellows, like a couple of tall sentinels, overlooking the broad expanse of forest. "I see them," was the answer. At the feet of those pine trees, he continued, runs the Texas road. Turn to the left, and it will lead you to William Ford's. Without farther parley, I hastened forward, happy as he was, no doubt, to place the widest possible distance between us. Striking the Texas road, I turned to the left hand as directed and soon passed a great fire where a pile of logs were burning. I went to it, thinking I would dry my clothes, but the gray light of the morning was fast breaking away. Some passing white man might observe me. Besides, the heat overpowered me with the desire of sleep. So lingering no longer, I continued my travels and finally, about 8 o'clock, reached the house of Master Ford. The slaves were all absent from the quarters at their work. Stepping onto the piazza, I knocked at the door, which was soon opened by Mistress Ford. My appearance was so changed, I was in such a woebegone and forlorn condition. She did not know me. Inquiring if Master Ford was at home, that good man made his appearance before the question could be answered. I told him of my flight and all the particulars connected with it. He listened attentively, and when I had concluded, spoke to me kindly and sympathetically, and taking me to the kitchen, called John and ordered him to prepare me food. I had tasted nothing since daylight the previous morning. When John had set the meal before me, the madam came out with a bowl of milk and many little delicious dainties, such as rarely please the palate of a slave. I was hungry and I was weary, but neither food nor rest afforded half the pleasure as did the blessed voices speaking kindness and consolation. It was the oil and the wine which the Good Samaritan in the great pine woods was ready to pour into the wounded spirit of the slave who came to him, stripped of his raiment and half dead. They left me in the cabin, that I might rest. Blessed be sleep. It visiteth all alike, descending as the dews of heaven on the bond and free. Soon it nestled to my bosom, driving away the troubles that oppressed it, and bearing me to that shadowy region, where I saw again the faces, and listened to the voices of my children, who, alas, for aught I knew in my waking hours, had fallen into the arms of that other sleep, from which they never would arouse. Chapter 10 does not roar. It aches. The violence is past, for now, but in its place comes something more insidious, more consuming, the weight of everyday enslavement. Solomon Northup, still alive after the attempted lynching, now becomes what the world demands he be: useful, silent, invisible. He is put to work, and the plantation swallows him. There are no whips in this chapter, no screaming. Instead, there is endless labor, axe in hand, sweat on brow, back bent beneath a punishing sun that offers no mercy, no shadow, no rest. Solomon is not merely surviving. He is dissolving into routine. The human spirit can endure many things, but monotony without freedom is its slowest death, for it still owns him. But the violence of Tibiats lingers in every task. Solomon does what he must. He works hard. He stays quiet. He avoids notice, because in this world, a glance can become a punishment, a question can become a lash, and even a moment of rest can be mistaken for rebellion. This is what slavery becomes after spectacle, a grinding machine that chews through days, through names, through hope. To the world around him, Solomon is plat now, his intellect unwanted, his music unplayed, his memories fading like dust in the cotton fields. Labor is not just labor, it's a tool of transformation. If the whip does not break you, the plow will wear you down until you forget you were ever anything else. This chapter reveals the economic backbone of slavery. It wasn't always rage and spectacle. Most of the time, it was structure: saws, plows, axes, barns, oxen. Organized like a company, run with brutal efficiency, each person a cog, each soul a line in a ledger. And the more valuable you are to the system, the more tightly you are bound to it. Ford's plantation is less violent than others, but don't mistake that for mercy, because Solomon is still a man, paid for, owned, and used. This chapter is quiet, but not peaceful. It's the silence of a man who cannot speak. The stillness of someone walking a line so thin. He no longer looks down. We do not see rebellion here. We see endurance. We see a man who still knows who he is, but says nothing. A man who remembers his family, but keeps it buried, like a treasure too dangerous to hold. In chapter 10, Solomon doesn't bleed. He doesn't cry out. He works. He survives. But every swing of the axe, every step in the dust, pulls him deeper into the place where memory fights silence. This is not escape. This is endurance in exile. And while the world sees a slave, deep inside, Solomon Northup is still waiting, still planning, still remembering.
Beaten, sold, and silenced, but not broken, Solomon's journey has just begun, and already he's seen more cruelty than most know in a lifetime. This was part 2 of 12 Years a Slave, chapters 6 to 10. I'm Raul, and you're listening to Audible Archives. If this story resonates with you, like, comment, and subscribe, because history lives in the voices we choose to remember. And so, the tale draws to a close, but the echoes remain here in the Audible Archives. And until our next journey through shadow and story, keep listening, keep wondering, because every ending hides another beginning. Audible Archives, where stories never sleep.